So it's really great to be here, and I'm really happy to share with you some cool insights about composition API patterns we are using in Vue Storefront. So first of all, let me introduce myself again. So I'm Filip Rakowski, and I'm a co-founder of Vue Storefront. So I hope you're doing a good marketing and you at least know what Vue Storefront is. But if you don't, it's basically a very, very advanced headless frontend that can work with any e-commerce platform, and it's open source and it's free. So if you're doing anything with e-commerce, you can check it on vuestorefront.io. And before I start talking about composition API, there is something important I'd like to mention. So this week is basically a mental health awareness week, and I think it's a good occasion to basically take care of ourselves. Because it's getting harder and harder to maintain work-life balance in isolation. I see this from myself, and it's getting easier than ever to be burned out, and we really don't want to end up in that situation, of course. So because of that, you should constantly validate if you don't work too much and if you're returning work-life balance. So please remember about this. Also, warning, this talk is opinionated, so there are some things that are good from my point of view. You might not, you might argue with this, and it's okay. This is why we are all sharing some opinions, but I just wanted to mention. So let's get to the presentation. In Vue Storefront, we are using Composition API for a while now. We are one of the first ones, I guess, to start with this API, and I think we are one of the largest projects currently using this. So I wanted to share with you some of our findings. So before we can get into details, I want to make sure that we're on the same page. So to those who don't know yet, a brief intro to Composition API. So what is Composition API? So in my understanding, the simplest possible definition of this is basically a set of Vue APIs that can be used outside or even without components. So something that we don't see in current version of Vue.js that much. But a good example of such API from Vue 2 is Vue Observable. So with Vue Observable, we can actually use Vue APIs outside of Vue.js components. So Composition API is actually bringing tons of functions, enabling exactly the same. This is how it looks like. So at the top, we are importing the functions that we want from Vue.js. So computed is well-known function, and reactive, this is basically behaving more or less like Vue Observable. And in component, we have a setup method. So setup method is something new to Composition API, and works the way that first we are invoking the code, and then we are returning the data and methods to the state. So the same way methods property and data property and computed property from options API was returning the data to the component, we are returning it from the setup method. And we can divide Composition API functions into actually two groups. So old ones that are kind of like syntactic sugar for currently existing Vue APIs, and new ones that are bringing some additional functionalities and also helping us to actually work with this old one. So the old ones are reactive and ref, which are basically meant to create an observable and reactive objects for properties. We also have functions for lifecycle hooks, so on before mount, on updated, on mounted, etc. And we also have watch and computed functions, which are behaving like the same functions from Vue 2. And we also have provide inject functionality, which works more or less the same as in Vue 2. We also have a bunch of new functions. So we have read-only function, which makes a reactive property read-only. We have watch effect. We have also a bunch of helpers that are meant to help us working with Composition API. And we also have some methods for more sophisticated usage of what we have on the left-hand side. Okay, so now that we're all on the same page, more or less, it's time to talk why actually it's so good and why it's so awesome. So to understand that, we need to dig a little bit deeper into Vue ecosystem. So the way how it works right now is enforcing or promoting some certain way of organizing your code. So specifically grouping it by file type or responsibility. So let me explain what I mean. When we build a Vue component, for example, that contains different functionalities, let's say we are building a blog component, so it contains posts, it contains comments, it contains some information about the user, so he can comment, for example. So when we build this component that contains different functionalities, we have no way of keeping the logic responsible for certain features in one place. Actually, we could write a mixin, but like don't even let me start on that because this is not the best API. So we are putting methods in methods property, data in data property, then invoke it in lifecycle hook. So everything is mixed. This is more or less how our components look right now. So each color is representing a business logic of a certain feature, and as you see, it's distributed across a whole component. And same, it's actually the same with high-level architecture of our applications. So we usually have a centralized Vuex store, Vuex. I still don't know how to call it properly, which is responsible for all data-related operations. Then we have components. Sometimes we also have a data layer for API calls. So our code base could look more or less like this. We have a folder for each type, for each file type, and this is still considered the most common way of organizing Vue.js code. Of course, we can even create more of that. So we could have a helpers folder. We have like post helpers, comment helpers, user helpers, and the code responsible for a certain feature is distributed across the whole code base. And there is nothing particularly wrong in organizing your code that way if you have good reasons for that. But for most of projects, and like by default, it could lead to significant maintenance issues. So it's easy to end up with a messy code, and not to mention poor developer experience, because when you work on something, we're usually working on a certain feature, not a file type. So it's much better to have everything in one place rather than look into every for each piece of a puzzle across your whole code base. Yes. Okay, so we know how it looks right now with Vue 2 and Options API, and is Composition API bringing something new? Does it solve issues? What does it solve? Let's find out. So, as we have just seen with Composition API, we have only a single function, so the setup function. Of course, we can use it alongside with Options API, and sometimes it makes sense, but generally it's kind of a replacement, so one way or another. So because we have a single function, we can group code related to a certain feature together, like on the right side. And we can do even more. We can externalize it. So here we have an example from the official RFC of Vue Composition API. On the left side, we have a component, and on the right side, we have a function that is basically externalizing the mouse position functionality. So because we can put business logic related to specific feature in separate function, we can also make it reusable across the whole code base. Like in this example, actually, we can externalize whole business logic into such functions and just compose our components from this function. So it's really clean, it's really predictable. And if you want to remove or replace some specific feature, we just have one place to look for. So it's a huge improvement. It's also easier to organize our code on a high level because for each feature we need a single file that will contain all the business logic and state related code. Regarding state, I will dig a little bit deeper into that soon. So now I hope you're convinced that with Composition API, we have kind of like a really, really cool revolution in terms of developer experience for Vue.js, because it makes our life so much easier. I already had the chance to work with it for a couple of months, and I have a comparison to Options API, and it's a really, really powerful tool. So Now I want to share with you how we made use of this awesomeness in Vue Storefront. So first of all the business logic we have in Vue Storefront is basically a set of composition API functions. So if you want to use Vue Storefront for a specific e-commerce platform, the only thing you need to use is basically to install the package, for example, Vue Storefront/commerce tools for commerce tools, which is an e-commerce platform, and you will have access to multiple composition API functions, which you can use everywhere. So you can use them in Next, you can use them in VCLI projects or in a custom Vue projects. We're not shipping any components. Of course, we are also shipping a default theme that has this plugged into the UI. But basically, our architecture is based on this composition API function. So each feature has basically its composition API function. And as you see, each part of e-commerce logic has its own composition API function that gives a full control over specific feature. So there is one to interact with products, there is one to interact with category, there is one responsibility for checkout, and you don't need to be really smart to also see that this is basically corresponding to specific pages. So because we grouped our code by high-level features, when you write components or pages, you are using only one or two composition API functions. And this is really great for performance. Because it's much easier to do a code splitting and lazy loading when you need to take care of a single file only, instead of like 20 files that are also containing different pieces of business logic related to different features. And it really helps us to keep our bundle size small. So when we need only one or two composition functions per page, it's much harder to end up with unnecessarily business logic related to other features in page chunks. And usually you're just downloading what you need, and like that's all, as simple as that. Now let's get a little bit closer to the code, because I haven't showed any composition API code that is not from the RFC. So the benefits are not stopping, of course, on the high level, and composition API basically is a great way to replace your current state management libraries and a great state management tool by itself. So when you talk about local state, what I mean by local state is something that is local to a certain composition API function. For example, we have a use product composition API function, which is basically responsible for fetching products and keeping them, and also informing about loading state. So this is a simplified version of what we have in Vue Storefront. And now when we want to use it in, for example, post. Nice. I made a small mistake here, sorry. It should be a product. So if you want to make use of it, we're basically invoking this product function and then searching for a specific product. And when we invoke search, it's populating the products property with the results. And we are using computed properties as a wrapper to return values, to make sure that the state can't be modified outside the function. We can also use read-only, which is a new API from Vue 3. So just by using ref of computed, so two composition API functions, we actually managed to have a local scalable state, and we have a full control over how it could be modified. So this is pretty cool and much simpler than Vue's. And because each invocation of use product is creating a new state, we can use it multiple times in the same component, and each invocation will have its own state. So we can call use product first to fetch the actual product, then to fetch some related products to this product, for example, from the same category, and each of them will have its own instance of product object. And the same way we are using composition API for this local state inside composition API functions, we can use it to manage state that is global or shared, however you call it. So as I said, it could be a great replacement for state management libraries like Vue's. And we basically don't need Vue's. when we're using Composition API, because we can simply write our own views, just in a few lines of code. So on the left-hand side, we have our implementation of views like state management. So we have a state, we have getters, we have also mutations, and then we are returning this UI state object. And as you can see, the state object itself can't be modified from the outside. And when we are using this in our components, we're just importing the features and returning them to the view, and it just works. And what is really great about this is that you can benefit from auto-completion and you can benefit from tree shaking, and you basically can't do this with views. So we can build our own state management library. It could grow with functionalities. For example, we could use watch function to add some kind of logging of state management changes, etc. So it's pretty powerful. But we are not limited to Vue-like solutions. And we can basically use Composition API functions to manage all the business logic. As I said, in Vue Storefront, we basically have only Composition API functions. So let's get back to the shared state. We have basically two types of it. So the first one is shared state across specific composition function invocations. For example, card, when we have a use card function, no matter where we call this, we always want to access the same card object. Yes, so if we add something on the header, then we want to see this on the card. Or if we add something on a product page, we want to see it on the checkout page. So we need to always have the same instance of a card. And there is also a state shared across whole application. For example, it could be a user object. So when we are doing an authentication, we usually need this in many places. And in e-commerce, you usually need this in a cart, you usually need this in a user profile, sometimes on a wish list, so it could be saved. There are many places where we actually need the user data. And well, when we are talking about state that is shared across specific composition function invocations, it's pretty simple because the only thing that we need to do is basically leave the state up. So move it out of the function. And by doing this, we're making sure that the state is created only once. So not on every invocation of use card. And every invocation of use card will be just using this state. As simple as that. Also, for the state that is shared across whole application, we can approach it in two directions. So the first one is basically using one compositional function is another, because it's called compositional function not without a reason. It's basically we are basically meant to compose specific functionalities from another. And another way that we are experimenting with right now is to basically also have a shared hidden state as a file, and this could be potentially more performance friendly, because in this example, whenever we are using card, we need to download the whole user composable or compositional function. I'm not sure if anyone is using composable name. And in that case, we only need to download this shared.js, which is not containing any user logic at all. Also, Composition API, it's introducing some interesting ways to reuse our code. So we have seen the first one. We can externalize our logic into functions and then parameterize them, for example, to fetch different products from the same function. But it wasn't enough for us in Vue Storefront, because one of our promises is the fact that no matter which e-commerce platform you're using, you have consistent developer experience. Oh, another mistake. It should be use product. It's not my best day. Anyway, so let's imagine we have use product type here. No matter which package we are using, so if it's a package for WooCommerce or it's a package for commerce tools, where the code below should work. So this is our way of ensuring that developer experience across every integration of Vue Storefront is more or less the same. So as you probably could imagine, most of the business logic inside this composable would be the same. Only there will be slight differences. For example, how we are fetching the the product logic. So how can we solve this problem? How we can reuse the use product logic, but also leave a room for some kind of customization. So what we came up is actually using factory functions. So on the right side, we have a use product factory, which is delivered from Vue Storefront core package. And we are using this factory in both CommerceLoose and WooCommerce packages. And we're just invoking this, passing the product type for a specific platform. So we have better auto suggestions, but also passing factory params. And if you take a look at the right side, product.value is awaiting a function from factory params. So this function is basically a function that is responsible for fetching the product data for a specific platform. So that way we can also write composition API functions that are sharing the logic, but are also customizable. So this is more or less how it looks like. And that's all I wanted to share today. So it wasn't a very long presentation. And I would really, really encourage you to experiment with composition API because it's a really, really, really nice thing. And I think there are no good or best practices set it up yet. So there is a room for innovation. And it was really enjoyable for me actually to work with this. And I see a huge, huge potential for that. And I really encourage you to also experiment with it. Thank you very much. If you want to see these live examples in our repo, this is the link. And if you liked what you have seen, and if you like Vue Storefront, you can also give us a star or follow our project on Twitter. Thanks.